I sketch on, I guess I'd say Logic mostly. Logic or bits of paper. A lot of music starts on paper, some of it starts on the computer, some of it starts plugging patch chords in and out of synthesizers, you know. But Logic is a kind of easy writing tool. There are a few things, you know, like for example, I love vocoders, old analog vocoders. I've got a whole bunch of different ones. They're great, fantastic. It's an amazing tool to misuse creatively, you know, not for doing the sort of cheesy vocal stuff, but because you've got just lots of bands of filtering, and you can just play with them, you know, which is great. That's good. Various sorts of dynamics things. I think the transient design is an amazing tool. Because of the way you can screw around with envelopes, really great. And of course, you know, you can never have too many compressors, all different kinds. I do use them, yeah, and particularly for things like films. You know, you have to be able to play the director. You know, what is it? You know, it's this. Oh, okay. You know, so that's really important. I don't really like to use samples in the final thing. Yeah, it doesn't. For me, that's, you know, so much of music is about the relationships with the players and the way everything connects and people talking to one another, and you get new ideas from that. That's really the way I like to do it. So if you're using samples, it's dead by comparison. You know, it's kind of less fun. I think it is. I think people who haven't had a sort of traditional training, you know, it's a way to, for example, learn orchestration, you know, just by hearing it. You know, oh, the horns do that, the strings do that. Oh, that's quite good. You know, that sounds a bit like Mahler or something. You know, so it's kind of a way to, it's a way into that, because it's pretty complicated. You know, dealing with an orchestra from like a theoretical perspective. It's like you do have to know a lot. You know, but if you're actually just using your ears to hear into it, then you know, you get all that kind of training for free very quickly if you're sort of listening carefully. So it's really handy, I think, yeah. I think it was. I mean, I think, you know, you never quite know what you're picking up as you go along. And it's only looking back that stuff starts to make a bit of sense, you know. I mean, at the time I was, I don't know, I was just in a sort of that chaotic, trying to find things out phase, you know, and listening to everything and trying to pick up everything, which is, you know, that's very natural. And I was sort of studying with people, and I, at the time, didn't think I was really learning anything. I just thought it was all just a bit, I don't know, I just wanted to get out there and do music, really. But looking back, you know, that very formal kind of a training, very academic, kind of old-fashioned training, you know, has sort of informed pretty much everything I've done after that, one way or another. You know, and it's very natural for me to kind of use that sort of language and speak back to that sort of music, and yeah. Some really do start in the machine, things which are kind of sound-based, process-based, dubby kind of ideas. They really live in the machine, and they never leave, you know, they just start there and they stay there. It's electronic all the way. I mean, it often ends up on tape. I try to use as much, you know, I like real recording, I like tape, and it just gives it a sort of interesting, beautiful quality. So I do that a lot. Things which are more written down, which are more for the players, they either start in the machine or I just write them on paper. If they're in the machine, then I'll normally transfer them over to Sibelius to do the scoring, and just print the parts, and then that's it. You know, it's kind of made from there. I have a plan. I have things I want to sort of talk about. I don't always stick to that. You know, it sort of gets away from you a bit. You know, you start working on something and you think you're working in a certain way, but quite often you get to the point where you actually just have to throw it all away and just kind of go with the material and go where it's going. And that can be quite exciting and quite scary, and it's like, well, I've just made all this, but what am I going to do with that then, you know? And it's like, well, you've got to throw it all away, because it's not right, it's not adding up to something, you know? And I'm sort of interested in albums to not just be a random collection of tracks, but to be something which is coherent and which kind of works as a whole. So yeah, I mean there's sort of a planning phase and then a chaos phase and then more planning and more chaos, and eventually it just kind of settles into something which makes sense and starts to take on a kind of, has its own kind of force of gravity holding it together. And then you start, oh, well, there's actually something there, And then it's like navigating through this uncharted thing and adding little things onto it and just trying to keep it as a shape. It sort of all starts with the instrument. Great instrument, best possible mics, which is mostly for the instruments like this is ribbons or valves. Great preamps, pretty much always record to tape, 2-inch tape, 16 track, not 24 track. And the choice of the mixing desk, so it's a sort of old Neves, or one of my favorite desks is an MCI desk at Eastcote. And just the whole, attention to detail to every little bit, the converters, everything. I mean, I'd rather be making LPs, honestly, but, we have to go digital, so we do. So then it's the best possible converters and the best, the for example, the mastering on the records is done by Mandy Parnell it's now at Electric. Amazing ears, and she has an old Bakelite EQ, and it's all great. So as much magic as possible, and but I guess it really starts with the mics and the preamps and the tape. I mean, today we're doing this, it's a film score. I have brought some electronic music on disc. There's going to be some strings, there'll be some piano. It's all sitting up there in Pro Tools. There are click tracks for the players to play against. We're also synced to the picture, so I can see the picture in the control room, and if it's all exactly as I want it, then I can make changes against the picture very easily. Like I say, there's some electronics, and there's some bowed wine glass recordings and stuff like that. It's quite an ethereal kind of a score. So there's lots of stuff up there that I can change within Pro Tools very fast as we go. And the guys will be down here playing. And great room. It'll sound amazing. It's a different language. Writing music for a film is fundamentally not about the music. That doesn't mean to say the music doesn't have to be good. I mean, it still has to work as music. But ultimately, when somebody's watching the film, it's the image and the sound that they stick together, and you get this kind of magic alchemy, and it's just like suddenly you're seeing new things in the picture when you're hearing it, and vice versa. You get this incredible it's like this sort of chemical reaction happens. It's a really magical process, I think, which is really exciting to be involved with. I guess the other thing that's nice about for me for working with film is because I work sort of on my own. There's me in my studio making the record, for months on end. That's what's going on. Not a lot of conversations, I'm just kind of sitting there going slowly crazy. Working with a film is great because it's a director. We can have conversations, it's just a much more kind of human kind of activity. Whereas, writing a record is quite sort of hardcore. It's a piece of paper, ideas, So it's a different thing in a way. I'm still quite interested in all the kind of new acoustic music that's coming through. Over the last couple of years, obviously I was involved with Vashti's record, and so I've sort of got connected into a lot of what's going on there, and I think there's some very creative, fascinating music there. Joanna Newsom's new record's an amazing record. Pretty interesting, sort of quite musicianly thoughtful stuff being made, which is really, I think it's great. Ian Stevens, people like that, it's really interesting. I suppose I'm sort of optimistic and pessimistic, because I see that the classical music culture exists in the way that museums exist. It's like going to a historical art exhibition rather than a contemporary art exhibition. You know, there is the body of work and it's all there. You know, and that stuff is great stuff. But I think it has a lot of attitudes around it which are very off-putting for people, which I think is really, that's a shame, you know. That's a real shame, and I don't know what the answer is to that, really. The contemporary music world itself has a kind of eclecticism and a kind of quite a dynamic energy about it, which is really interesting. You know, there's some very interesting stuff out there, but it's hard. You know, most of it gets played kind of once, you know, which is pretty sad. So it's full of challenges and puzzles, really, the classical music world. It's there are great things there, encumbered by a lot of cultural baggage, which is quite unappealing. So it's difficult. I don't really know. I mean, I would say the thing to do is to just find out what you really like doing best, you know, and not worry too much about, you know, what's out there and the scene, all the various little scenes, and just kind of do your thing. Because, you know, that's all any of us have got, right? There's only one you. Do that, I'd say.